everyone, and welcome back to another episode of What's Kraken. This week we have Kellie Stout, Sam Ross, and Michael Bassal joining us to speak about global fan bases and how they relate to brands across the world. So really excited to dive into this topic today. Thank you guys for joining us. Perfect.
Hi, everybody.
We'll just kick it off. Just the way that we usually do is just getting to know all of you a little bit better and get an understanding of your relationship with sports, like how you've gotten to where you are today, and kind of like your start into this industry in general. So, Kellie, can you kick it off?
Yeah, sure. I started in sport straight out of high school, so did a couple of internships that were unpaid and just worked my way up to the NRL and AFL ranks, and was at the Sydney Swans before starting at Tradable, and just haven't looked back since.
Amazing. I don't know, Sam, if you've had like a similar experience interning.
Yeah, so for me, I got my start in sport through grad school. So I was fortunate enough to attend the Vinnick Sport and Entertainment Management program at the University of South Florida down in Tampa. Part of my program, we do a lot of work with some of our corporate partners around the area, like the Tampa Bay Lightning, Fox Sports, which really got me some introductions into the industry. And then fortunate enough to get in touch with Tradable Bits. They brought me up from sunny Florida to rainy Vancouver and got my start there working with them nearly 4 years ago.
That's amazing. Yeah, I guess there seems to be like a similar trend though of like you get your foot into the industry first and then you kind of like work your way up that way. Is that the same for you, Michael?
Yeah, I think I come from a little bit of a different background. I come mostly from the music industry, and I was raised in Italy, which is a little bit of a different approach to sports business than there is in North America. I come more from being like a really, really big soccer fan, AC Milan fan, and joining Tradable Bits on the music side and slowly scaling the sport aspect of it. So I come more with the fan background rather than the sports business background.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's like a kind of a fundamental start for everyone, though, is that to be able to get into the industry and be able to work through it, you have that really close connection as a fan as well. So that's kind of why I wanted to bring all three of you together today. Is I think there's like a really interesting understanding of what it means to be a fan in different places and how you relate to the brands and sports brands that you love that way. Like we have a saying here, fans fan differently. So I was just wondering about your perspective on that, like working across North America to Australia to Europe. Have you seen differences in the way that fans want to interact with the sports brand that they love, like the things that they like or the things that are like totally like no-go zone? Yeah, so we can just dive into that. But Michael, I think that you have a great perspective because you were living here in Canada, Europe, now you're in Israel. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a great experience when I moved to North America and seeing fandom in North America, which is a lot more advanced and different than what I was used to in Europe. I think the really nice thing about Europe is that sport has a really deep roots in history. So you'll find teams that have 100 years old, 110 years old, 120 years old, and that really becomes part of the community, meaning I grew up in an AC Milan household. I became an AC Milan fan, and my grandparents were the same, and my grandparents used to go to the same stadium. So it's really about the loyalty aspect of it, and I think people are a lot more, I would say, picky and controlling of their passion for sport, which it's really valuable on one aspect. Reason why probably some of the biggest brands in the world end up being in Europe, like Barcelona, Real Madrid, Milan, Juve, Manchester United, Arsenal, and we can count many more. But it's definitely different than North America, where they're able to, I would say, exploit the business side a lot better.
Yeah. What would you say about that, Sam? Do you think that's accurate? Like,
yeah, I definitely think it's pretty accurate. I mean, in comparison to sport in Europe, a lot of fandom in North America is actually quite young, right? When we look at some of our leagues, the ages of some of our teams, etc., there's a lot less history there. I think in North America, you also see a lot more focus on the superstars when it comes to fandom. Of course, like everywhere in the world, a lot of sport fandom is based in a geographical region, and you're a fan of your local team. That's always going to be the case no matter where you are. I would say in North America, you see a lot more of the fan that also follows a superstar that they love. Obviously, the biggest example of this is LeBron. There's people all over North America, even the world, that love LeBron, and they're going to be a fan of no matter which team he's playing for at the time, right? We see a lot more of that with North American sport. I'd also say that with North American sport, you also see a lot more following when it comes to the partnership side as well. So you have fans that are a lot more accustomed to having, brands involved with their teams. Obviously, more than ever, we're seeing that this needs to be a bit of an endemic approach where the brand is providing some level of value to the fans as well. But they don't have a problem with it, whether that's through digital activations that they're doing, maybe coupons or something like that. But it's just such a part of North American sport is that you expect to see sponsorship and you expect to have those brands as part of your fandom, and you're always going to see them around.
Yeah, definitely. Along that same line, like, I think there might be like a difference between North America and Europe versus Australia. Like, there seems to be more of a willingness to work with partners, as you said, in North America than in Europe necessarily. It seems like to be a little less transactional. But on the Australian side, like, how do fans feel about partnerships and having kind of like these third parties involved in their fan community?
Yeah, I think just to go off the back of what Sam and Michael were saying, Australia is almost one step younger than sport in Europe and North America, and that sports business has kind of only become a recent thing in probably the last 10 or 15 years. Before that, it was really amateur sort of sport still. So we're sort of starting to see that real change. But I think the difference in membership, the way we kind of have our membership in the AFL and NRL is very different to the way you guys have your season ticket holders. And this is a discussion that we have a fair bit in terms of sort of trying to describe how membership works here is a really interesting concept. And I didn't realize how different it actually was until I was looking for a membership for Arsenal. And I was like, they don't have one as such. So it's a really weird concept, but I think it's, as you said, it's all about having that sort of team feeling. I think here as you're part of the team, you're that 18th player on a field, or you're that extra player is kind of how we run it. But from a sponsorship perspective, it kind of is about that partnership. It sort of ties in really nicely. It's not so transactional, but we tend to find that, there's one big brand that links up with each club, and then you have those minor partnerships below it.
Please, Kelly, for anyone that's watching, can you explain in 10 seconds or less what a membership is? Save them from opening Google in another tab.
Yeah.
For our North American viewers, what is a membership?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of pressure representing the entire Australian sport industry here.
In 10 seconds.
Yeah. I think it's essentially a season ticket package. So you can have a couple of different variations. So you get the season tickets if you're a game access member, or you're got your at-home membership, which is just you're paying a bit of money to be a part of the club, and you essentially get a little bit of merchandise, you get discounts, you're part of the club in terms of getting that exclusive news and offers.
And some clubs may have tens of thousands of members, right, at all various levels. Even if there's just a big group of people that are at-home supporters that just wanted to be a part of the group. Yeah.
So at Rangers, we tend to have quite a few members at that at-home level, particularly if they can't get out to games. Then you have people that are spending sort of $1,000, $2,000 on the ultimate memberships. But I think we've got clubs in the AFL that have got something like 100,000 members for some of the clubs. So it's pretty big here. It's a big part of the sporting realm. And I think particularly in Melbourne, it's essentially a religion down there. You've got to be a member of some sort of AFL club.
Best summary I've heard so far about this whole membership thing.
Yeah, I think that's perfect.
Wow, that's amazing. Just for like understanding from my perspective as well, like we have memberships, which is a little bit different than the season ticket holders that we have here in North America. How do fans buy tickets, like connect with their sports teams in Europe?
There's many different ways. Funnily enough, I was looking for tickets to go see Chelsea Juventus this week, and I can tell you that in the Premier League it's a lot different from Italy, for example. Prices, most of tickets in the Premier League for the top teams for sure are seasonal tickets, just like Kelly was saying. So people, I would say, own those chairs. Most of the teams allow for a reselling platform that is owned by the team. So there's a great and safe way for fans to exchange those seats and make sure that the stadium is always full, which is I would say a common scenario if you look at the UK, which is an island on itself, and keeping it at soccer, for example, if you fade out into Italy and Spain and France and so on, 100% capacity, like 100% filled up stadiums is not exactly the most common activity. Maybe for the top 3-5 games of the season, you get sellouts. But on an average game during a weekly, it's pretty simple to find tickets, to buy tickets. As I mentioned earlier, because it's a legacy thing and is really tied into the history of the city, you have to price it accordingly, meaning it's always priced in a way that everyone and anyone can go watch a game. As long as it's not the top one game of the season, which of course is going to be sell out. So at that point, it's market prices, let's call them. But in terms of sales, I grew up in Milan and we could go to the stadium with probably starting from 11 euros, 15 euros. So it was something that anybody could kind of be a part of. And it's really, like Kelly was saying, like it's you're a part of a family. Like I'm a Milan fan, and Milan is a big part of how we grew up. It's not just a thing that I like to watch on Sundays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess like speaking about kind of like connecting with fans, and also like for instances where the stadium is not necessarily filling up with like local fans coming to buy tickets. There seems to be like a trend towards like reaching a more global audience and tapping into those revenue streams there and tapping into that fandom there. So I was wondering if like any of you have like a team or a brand that you think does a really solid job of reaching global fans, and kind of like the way that they're leveraging global fan bases to either increase revenue or like or what they're doing and like what the point of reaching these global fans is for teams. So I don't know, Sam, if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, I think there's a few different examples, and what I would look at as teams work to grow a global fan base typically tends to be, and a number of North American leagues do this, is overseas series. So you see the NFL, they will travel to London and they'll play games there, and they've really built up a fan base of NFL fans in the UK. I think they're also now starting to do this in Germany next year as well. So you'll have NFL games live. The locals can buy tickets and they can attend and they can actually see the product in person, which really is what's going to create fans, right? You can consume as much, digitally as possible, but the best way to create a fan for life is to be in those locations. And you see some teams like the Jacksonville Jaguars, Miami Dolphins, that often will travel for these away games overseas. And they've really built up a fan base there. I have some friends from the UK, and if you ask them their favorite NFL team, they say it's the Jags. I'm like, what a strange team to be a fan of. And they're like, well, I got to see them when I was a little kid, in person. My dad took me. It really creates those fan moments that we all love about any of the other sport that we get to see too, right? It's an experience when you're younger, or it's spending time with your family or your friends that create fans for life. So that's a good example. I would also look at teams that are focusing on some multimedia. You look at the success of F1 Drive to Survive, right? It created F1 fans worldwide. You look at some of the Amazon series around, New Zealand rugby, or the Brazil soccer team. The Toronto Maple Leafs have now released one this fall. That's only going to help. Toronto Maple Leafs are already, I think, a global brand, but now having a series that fans can watch around the globe is just going to bring them into the arena, give them behind the scenes access that everybody loves. And it's just going to help increase their brand worldwide.
Yeah. So do you think it's like more of that, obviously like the fan moment, having that like practical experience, but it's also kind of more that personalization, like connecting on a different level?
Exactly. It's creating a connection, right, of some kind. If the fan feels like they're a part of the group, and if they can get an understanding of who that team is, right? I think that's what's actually going to create a global fan, or like a fan from elsewhere, right? It's really easy for us today to follow any team and see, what the scores are, and get notifications on our phones when we wake up to see how, my favorite Premier League team did over in the UK while I was asleep. But what's really going to turn me into a fan of that is if I actually get an understanding of the brand. I feel like I know who they are, even though I'm not sitting there in the stadium. I can see it, I can feel it, and I can be a part of the group, sort of like Kelly was saying with the membership.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think one of the ones that you mentioned is like, it's a really interesting one, New Zealand rugby, for like such a small island, like having their brand just, wipe the globe. Like, do you have any insights there, Kellie, on like what they do really well, or like how they've kind of reached global audiences coming from such a small place, essentially?
Yeah, I think New Zealand rugby are really good in the way that they have a lot of their traditions. They uphold a lot of their traditions while still going out to those global audiences. We always seen like the Harkers tend to go viral. They're very well in terms of the way they represent themselves after a game. You'll see them cleaning up in the sheds. So it sort of really resonates with any sort of global fan. But I think one thing that we've noticed is this northern tour that they've recently been on. They've gone over to, I think it was the USA, to France, to Ireland. They're starting to really branch out into those sort of spaces where there's sort of less traditional rugby rivals, which is really interesting to see, but reaching out to their fan bases whilst they're there. So we're starting to see them engage in some different campaigns and activations, and they're definitely trying to target them that whilst you might be in the USA, you can still support the New Zealand rugby team. So it's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I remember like even in high school when we learned rugby here in Canada, it was always like, look at what they're doing in these teams, like follow this. And it felt like more tied to New Zealand in a way than it did to like any Canadian sport. So I thought that was interesting in the fact that like they have created a global brand that kind of extends for kids from the moment they start to like career wise that way as well. And I feel like it's the same for football or soccer in Europe, but I don't know if like some of the biggest brands in the world are like European football teams. So what do you think that they do well, Michael?
I think there's a couple of things that were mentioned both by Kellie and Sam that really resonate in Europe, which is really the sort of hyper localization of that engagement. You know, those brands used to be European brands that had fans abroad. Now they are international brands that speak to different fans in different ways, that create different sponsorships and different partnerships depending on each territory. They use all the different social media networks per each different country. So it's really, I think, well, we're like 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was mostly the fans looking for the team. I think the teams now have flipped a little bit of that formula and they're really going granularly in each and every single territory and trying to speak the language of the people instead of forcing, let's say, that their local culture and their local environment into the fandom. And I think there's a couple of really great examples on that. I'm a bit biased, but I think Milan and Inter have done a fantastic job in doing that in the last couple of years. They're extremely well-renowned brand. They didn't have the most successful 10, 15 years in terms of results, but they were really able to, by starting really small with things like opening Twitter channels in English and open one in Indonesian and one in Portuguese and one in Spanish and starting to link with those different communities, they've really created micro communities, I would call them. Milan did something really nice for the Milan Inter game last week in New York. They got a really big club, brought in all the Milan fans. This was in partnership with Rock Nation, which is an extremely internationally known brand. And for me, for example, that I grew up in Milan, I can tell you that this is extremely out of the comfort zone of the brand. The brand is really historical and legacy and in its comfort zone, and the colors are the same, and everything really stays for a long time. But I see a lot of hyper localized digital activities that all of those teams are starting to do. And I think it's clear that there's a one-to-one connection in between that and revenue. To add one thing to it, to even make it a little bit more interesting and challenging, the whole concept of the Super League in Europe really came out of that it's 10% of your fans are the local fans and 90% of your fans are fans that exist all over the world. So how can we, keep the local fans engaged, because they're our legacy, they're our history, they're what makes the team what it is today, but also optimize the other 90% that sit in Canada, in Indonesia, in the US, in Germany, and so on. So really interesting. I think pandemic helped a lot making things really interesting for this localized approach, let's call it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would say, like, speaking of like the pandemic, the last 2 years have been absolutely insane for sports teams over the world, like learning how to adapt, coming up with new strategies. So you said, like, Michael, that you think a lot of it, this like globalization of fan base is like tied to the pandemic. But like, what specific strategies have you all seen from teams from the pandemic that kind of like reinforces that idea of global fan base?
I think, I've had a great kind of first-hand experience this week. I was participating at a soccer conference in Rome, and it's been 2 years that we've been away from Europe. There's now been a lot of meetings. Of course, things have picked up a lot faster, and 100% you can see that things have changed. A good example would be that we're talking about legacy teams. We're talking about teams that come with an older structure, which usually means older infrastructures and slower operations. And now you're joining, a soccer conference, and metaverse is something that is being talked about. And the second panel is about tokenification of fandom. And the third panel is about, the new fan token for fan engagement. So I think, COVID has pushed things also because it put brands as in teams in a position where liquidity was really an important thing. So I think the way that the decision making has been swinging was really following where the fans were going, which was digital, and everybody being at home and being on their computer on their phones, and also following where the money was going. If we look at crypto.com purchasing the Staples Center naming rights, we can clearly see that there's a trend there. And I think part of their job, and the pandemic has accelerated it and accentuated that, is that these brands need to become more business savvy and be able to monetize on those situations in the best way possible without disregarding the fan experience at any time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like all those things that are happening are like really interesting and cool, like the metaverse, like crypto, tokenization of fan bases. Do you guys see any like drawbacks with the kind of like gung ho like movement towards these spaces, and kind of like the money that like is pouring into all these new ways to reach fans?
The biggest thing for me, I don't think there's anything wrong with exploring new avenues of business for the teams, right? And we know that the pandemic was really hard on the sport and entertainment industry, right? So more than anything, teams need to look at creating new revenue streams and making sure that they have an established base, moving forward. The one thing they just want to be, I think, careful about is making sure not to alienate existing fans, right? If you look at the statistics across any league, the season ticket holder tends to skew a bit older, right? I think in the AFL, they're quite a bit older. And so you just want to make sure that as you adopt these new technologies and you sign these new partners and you introduce, paying by crypto at the arena and these different things, that you're not alienating your existing base, and that they still feel part of the brand and they still feel part of the family, which you can do for sure. But it's just, I think, a pitfall that teams need to be careful about. As they kind of look at the shiny new things over the next couple of years, making sure to maintain what they have going for them now as well.
I think it's interesting how you said about the older audiences, and you don't want to lose that. And we're definitely starting to see that here, is because rugby league and AFL are such traditional sports here, and there has only been that recent professional development compared to North America and Europe. Starting to see those people, so those fans kind of push against some of those newer updates. We've seen digital membership cards become a bit of a controversial topic amongst some fans who'd love to just have that physical card still. So it's interesting to see, as you said, you've got to balance bringing in some new technology, but also managing that old fandom.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in. Sorry for like interrupting you before, but with both like the younger versus older audiences and also like new ways to reach fans, do you think that most teams are going to kind of try and look for a more flexible offering when it comes to things like memberships or season ticket holding, or just like subscriptions that fans can have towards the teams?
Yeah, I think so. I think that flexibility and building, kind of your own plan or getting what you want is more important for younger generations than ever. So I can only see that trend continuing. I think what teams can do really well is I don't think they necessarily need to stop the push towards, let's say, digital tickets or anything like that. In North America, it's basically the norm at this point. I don't know of any venues offhand that you can still go to with a physical ticket. You just need to be sure to provide the support, right, for fans that are transitioning into that, and having the folks that they can talk to and get help. But yeah, I think moving forward, it's going to be sort of a build at your own kind of game when it comes to any form of membership or season ticket holder pack or anything like that.
Definitely. right, that was like a really interesting conversation. I feel like a lot of like similarities across the globe of what stands out for fans in different areas, but like there also is that really difficult topic of now of like localization, community building, but also like reaching that global fan base. So that was wonderful. Thank you guys all for having that discussion with me. But before we like sign off, there's like one thing that we like love to do is give almost advice for the next generation of people who want to work within sports. So just opening the door to things that you would tell yourself like 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, whatever, to kind of help you get your foot up in this industry. And yeah, I guess you guys can just take it away. I guess we'll start.
Who wants to start with the best philosophy? Let's see how all of us have different feedbacks in the last 5 years of your life.
I'll kick us off then. I think from my personal experience is just continue to work hard. I mean, as I said, I went through 2 unpaid internships before I got to this point. So just kind of keep working hard. You never know who's watching. And that's how exactly I got my role, was just going through those internships and having someone reach out as a connection. So yeah, keep working hard even when you think no one's watching.
Sam, do the honor.
Yeah, so, okay, first advice, younger me. Buy Bitcoin when it's cheap. It's number one. No, I think, I mean, it's similar. It's going to be, I think, the same for a lot of folks, right? It's getting experience, putting yourself out there, trying to meet different people in the industry and across various aspects of the industry, right? When I was younger, just starting out in the sport industry, I was very, focused, sort of one-track mind. This is what I know I want to do. And what I knew I wanted to do more than anything, it wasn't work at a tech company. You know what I mean? It's crazy where you can go, right? You just have to kind of put yourself out there and explore new things and learn, that there's a lot else in the industry beyond just working for maybe your dream team or your favorite team. And explore, different departments there. Partnerships is a big thing. Ticket sales is a big thing. Analytics, you know what I mean? So really just try and get varied experience across the industry, meet different people that work in different leagues and different levels of sport as well. Somebody that works in collegiate is very different than somebody that maybe works at the majors. And even some of the minor leagues, these are all very different things when it comes to sports. So really, get your hands dirty and try out different places. It's only going to help you understand better where you want to be at the end of the day and what's going to make you happiest. It's also going to give you the experience you need to kind of get a job at wherever it is that you want to end up.
I can add the last thing to it. I think, if I were to go back to myself and say something, I would say number one thing, don't focus on the job and focus on the people. Like a lot of times we think that, we live a university environment and working for the big brand is cool and working for the team that I like is cool and this is cool and that is cool. But at the end of the day, the only real thing that is going to make a difference is if you find good people on the way and you learn things from them and they challenge you and you have a great team and you feel comfortable. I think that's probably the number one suggestion. I was always looking for those, big companies, and I was even willing to do really, like not getting paid and other stuff like that, which if I think about it right now, I'm like, wow, lucky me that I could afford that at that time, but it's not a normal thing. And I would love for it not to be a normal thing. So that's definitely number one suggestion. And number two is, I think it's always continue learning, because it's, we joined, I think I can speak for all of us, but we joined this company as, let's call them entry-level people. We came with not a lot of experience. We came as young people getting their first feet into the industry and so on. And 2-3 years later, you become an expert in a certain field, and that transaction is really, really fast. So when you don't know things, you're probably in the right spot. And if you know a little bit of too much, you might want to challenge yourself a little bit more. But I think those are great things to continue kind of grow all the time.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it's always about the people. It's always about the relationships. It's also like always about kind of figuring out what you want to accomplish with where you are. So I think those are all like fantastic advice for people trying to lean into the industry. And I know, like, being in the position a couple of years ago, it's so overwhelming when you like leave school, just be like, there's so many different ways I could get started on this, but then like it's always just about get started.
And maybe also message people, like ask. Worst case, they don't answer, but like ask. send 10 of those. One is gonna say yes or okay, I'll take a coffee.
Yeah, definitely. People are nicer than we think. Or if they're not, then it doesn't matter because they're not replying. So
Exactly.
So
Win,
Michael's
win.
inbox is open.
Michael's inbox is wide open.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, thank you all for taking the time today to discuss this. This is a fun topic. I feel like we always kind of like exchange notes over here at Tradable Bits about the different kind of like fan bases, but also just like different industry trends. So this has been a really nice conversation. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to the conversation. If not, we can wrap it all up. We're good to go. Awesome.
Yeah, I think we're looking good.
I think we're good. This is a good chat. I think it's so interesting. I mean, I love getting this perspective because even, you know, I don't necessarily always get to chat about these type of things with Kellie and Michael. So it's always fun to have this kind of conversation. It's also interesting for me, obviously, as the North American representative on the call today, to hear you know, a little bit more about the differences of our partners around the world, but also the similarities, right? As sport begins to spread, you know, more widely, and you have leagues that, you know, are maybe based in one area, but they're getting more global, right? The similarities are going to really start to outweigh the differences between them, right? I know a ton of AFL fans here in Canada that you know, follow all the teams down in Melbourne and Sydney, so it's pretty interesting.
Awesome. All right, so we'll wrap it up. Everyone, that was this week in What's Kraken. So join us next time for another episode of What's Kraken, where we talk all things sports, music, entertainment, and technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Asha.